Hey, this is Kevin Wallis, and in this week's Pacific edition of Forerunners, the Surfline podcast, Lead Forecaster Schaler Perry and I will start by discussing the best practices during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, some changes to our premium analysis, and also touch on the more interesting storms currently in the Pacific. A bit after 16 minutes in, I'll be joined by Senior Forecaster Chris Borg to get a condensed history of Surfline and the many changes he's seen in his 35 years of the company. And just a reminder, if you're not already a premium member and would like to give us a try, which we would greatly appreciate, go to surfline.com/Forerunners podcast for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium. Here we go.
Okay, this is Sean Collins, Chief Forecaster of Surfline, and this is, the first order of business, looking down on the Southern Hemisphere, what to expect over the next 2 weeks.
At any given moment, a perfect wave is breaking somewhere on this earth. For the surfer, the trick has always been knowing where and when to find it.
Alrighty, Kevin Wallis here, as you probably already heard at the top of this pod, joined by fellow lead forecaster Schaler Perry. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at @SPerrySurfline.
I'm getting way better at that.
I know, I kind of nailed it that time. How you doing, man? And more importantly, how's Axel today?
Doing pretty good. Axeman is down for a nap. Just took a little drive around the neighborhood, and he is fast asleep. Hopefully, he stays that way for the duration of the podcast here today.
We'll see. I'd miss him if he didn't show up, though. I'll say.
It's always more fun when it's not your kid screaming in the background. Like it's a good time, and then it's your kid, and you just like you feel so bad and embarrassed by it. But if it's somebody else's kid, you're like, this is hilarious. Look what they have to deal with over there.
It's funny. I think there's probably many of our listeners, just many people around the world that are fortunate to continue to be working and are working at home right now. I think probably having kids, pets, whatever, interrupt meetings has become a pretty much daily routine, is my guess.
Yeah, the new normal.
Well, before we get into our Pacific Basin overview, we just wanted to give a quick heads up. As we mentioned in our podcast last week, we were kind of altering some of our products in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and just trying to stay kind of socially responsible in how we deliver information. And certainly this has been a bit of a moving target. Things are changing and evolving kind of day by day, and maybe what we were doing a week ago or even just a couple of days ago doesn't necessarily make sense today. And I think we want to continue to do that. Our messaging is such that, really we're to the point now, and it feels really strange to say this, but, you're probably thinking that most people just shouldn't be surfing. You hate to say that. That's the antithesis of why we exist, but I think it's probably the safest, most socially responsible thing to do. We also very deeply understand people's passion for the ocean and why it's such an important thing, for an important outlet for a lot of us right now too, and to try and get there. Just keep these things in mind, and you will see if you've been looking at the premium analysis, you've been looking at the reports on our site, you've been looking at some of the messaging on our site. This message kind of lives on our site in slightly altered forms, but just keep this in mind. If you can't get to the beach alone and surf alone, no standing next to your buddies in the parking lot, no chilling on the beach with a group of people, etc. Please don't. We want you to act responsibly, and that goes beyond social distancing too, and just limiting your exposure to the coronavirus. This is another really important thing to keep in mind. It also means doing your best to avoid situations that might put further stress on our first responders and healthcare system. Surfing in areas where water quality is a suspect, and we're getting a little bit better now in Southern California, in general, as we've seen couple days anyway, without too much rain. But surfing in waves beyond your comfort level too, that's going to put yourself and others at greater risk of injury. Both are irresponsible. We're seeing a lot of this in like kind of the backcountry skiing and snowboarding worlds right now, where
especially talk about the Sierras. It's the best snow really so far this season, and you have a lot of people going up into the backcountry, and kind of putting themselves in, to an extent, harm's way. I mean, most days it wouldn't be that big of an issue. Say you understand the terrain and you're kind of aware, at least have this awareness of kind of avalanche conditions and what have you, but there's still so much potential to break a leg, break an arm, get hurt to the point where you have to be taken out of the backcountry.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously none of us go into what, whether it's skiing or riding in the backcountry, or whether it's just surfing at your local beach break when it's only 2 foot. Just do remember, none of us go with the idea of wanting to get injured, obviously, but accidents can and do happen. So keep that in mind. Again, we really understand the draw to the ocean. I mean, neither Schaler or I would be sitting here talking to you as forecasters if we didn't have a real deep connection with the ocean. But hey, maybe give this a thought. If you can do some of these things responsibly, you can get to the beach on your own. You're not putting people at risk. Maybe not even surfing. Just get in the water. Go for a paddle, something like that. Just please do keep these things in mind as you make these decisions. And really, we would encourage you to stay home as much as possible. So. That all being said, now that's kind of the disclaimer that I feel like we need to make it on most of our podcasts now, at least for the time being, and a lot of our products on the site. But we also still love looking and seeing what's going on in the ocean, even if we can't surf, or at least most of us. For some of us, that may be kind of torture, but I think there's also a fascination that we have as forecasters that just checking out what's going on in the ocean and even if that means we can't surf that upcoming swell, it just, to me, it's still fascinating to see what the Earth's doing, what the ocean's doing.
Good to stay connected.
Yeah. So on that, you've taken the lead on our new style of premium analysis, which we are updating Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for both the Pacific and the Atlantic. It's a much more broad overview. It's really just the facts, about storms, and kind of taking a lot of the emotion out of it, and some of the details for specific places, or just about all the details for specific places. So with that in mind, like, what's going on in the ocean right now that looks interesting to you, and the Pacific in particular?
Well, in the North Pacific, we're really locked into our spring transition. It's become so apparent over the last week to 10 days, especially. So we're seeing our strongest storm systems really relegated to the higher latitudes and the corners of the basin. So the next few days, the strongest storm that we'll see is going to be in the high latitudes of the Gulf of Alaska. Not a major swell maker for most of the West Coast. Sends a couple of waves for areas up in the Pacific Northwest, but you have the winds and weather that are going to come with a storm system basically right on your doorstep there. Longer range, there's some storms in the far northwestern Pacific, but not really major swell makers across the basin. The most interesting thing in the North Pacific, as we move late week into the weekend, there'll be a modest strength, but pretty close low. It's going to drop just north of the Hawaiian Islands. Kind of a cool thing there. Looks like it sets up a fun shot of swell, quick pulse, not a long-lasting swell event, but something interesting. But outside of that, it's really looking at the long range. High pressure becomes so much more of a dominant feature over the North Pacific as you look at the long-range charts, the weather models, the climate models. It's really that fixture that you expect to see this time of year. Obviously, we typically go through our spring transition a little bit differently, and it's hard to believe that it's already the end of March and we've kind of been self-isolating for basically 2 weeks now in California. But here we are, and, the North Pacific looks the part, and the South Pacific is really getting going. Last week, we had significant swell for the South Shore of Hawaii, a couple of fun waves for the West Coast, but nothing massive. And then as we move through this week, we've already seen a very selective south swell from a storm system over the eastern South Pacific last week. Really strong storm, but more of a South America, Central America, mainland Mex type of event with a couple of areas really pretty fun off of that swell. I have a better straight south swell coming for the West Coast as we move through the second half of the week from a storm in the Central South Pacific that moved over into the eastern side of the basin. That's really the the meat and potatoes where we're going to see the most storm activity through really the next couple of weeks in the South Pacific is going to be the central to eastern part of the basin. Have a really impressive storm actually underway now. It's not necessarily the largest seas. I think measured seas right now, the largest we've seen so far is about 35 feet, but a very large storm system and a really impressive gradient between high and low pressure. So there's an area of high pressure near New Zealand that's ridging in behind this low, and the gradient right now is around 90 millibars and might get closer to 100 millibar gradient as we move through the middle of the week, so into Wednesday, which is pretty exceptional. It's a large area of pretty strong winds, and that gradient really helps drive consistent winds. So it's great for swell production. Obviously, this storm is very far south. It's near the Antarctic Circle, and that's going to have an impact on the consistency and the size for a lot of areas, but it's still looking like a pretty impressive event for most of the Americas.
Cool. Yeah. So just to back up a little bit and without going into surf specifics here, but kind of more like surfology, and for those at-home forecasters, when we talk about the pressure gradient, and you just touched on this a little bit, but it would just be the difference basically the difference in pressure between the low pressure area, which would be the storm, and the high pressure area, which is typically associated with fair weather. And the larger that difference, generally speaking, the stronger the wind within a storm. Oftentimes, the more consistent the wind can be within a storm, especially when you're dealing with major pressure gradients like that. You mentioned a 90 millibar pressure gradient. That's really on the upper end of the spectrum when we look at swell producing storms that
absolutely.
that we've seen over the years.
It's pretty wild. It's been on the charts for quite a while. I think the European model had a close to 100 millibar gradient probably almost 10 days ago. And here we are, and it's kind of there, and it's something that really stood out on the charts long range, and it's pretty cool to see it come to fruition. But like you said, it's really exceptional. Most of our decent swell events, like 70 millibars, that's a pretty good gradient. Yeah.
And this one, the high right now is like 10, or like the last 24 hours, 1036, 1038. Was that where we were?
1036, the last I saw.
Yeah. So, pressure that high over the open ocean is really pretty impressive. And generally speaking, as forecasters, when we see a high that's buttressing a low, anytime that it's like,
buttressing. There you go.
I know how we go. 1032 millibars or above, that starts to get our attention. When we get 1038, 1040 or more, that really starts to get our attention. And I think back to, this was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. There was a really crazy north swell for Hawaii that was essentially set up by this.
The massive area of high pressure.
Yeah. I think that high ended up being something like 1052 or 1054 or something like that, which is something you'd expect to see like over Siberia in the middle of the winter. Not something you'd see.
And even still, it's still a
North
stretch
Pacific.
To see pressure that high. I mean, whenever we see anything that's over 1034, 1036, that's a pretty respectable area of high pressure, and it's something you really take into account if there's a storm system setting up next to it, even if it might not be the most impressive storm, because you're going to have pretty consistent winds and, generally speaking, good swell development.
Yeah, I think at first that and this goes back to that Hawaii swell, the models weren't even indicating it was going to be a closed low next to it. It was kind of this like more almost like a trophy feature, and the models ended up underestimating the swell size, but it was big enough that it was a jaws swell, like legitimate jaws swell from high pressure, which is almost unheard of. That was a really, really unique event. Again, probably 7-8 years ago, something like that, and it's certainly burned into my memory. And I remember thinking that it was I was working with a couple of people going to Jaws and thinking, okay, this is, it's going to be not like crazy Jaws. It's going to be probably 15-foot Hawaiian, so 30-ish foot faces. No, it was like legit. It was like 18 to 20 feet, and just the models really underestimated the
That's such a
wind.
funny statement. It's not going to be crazy Jaws.
Yeah, I know. How you it's never like it's such a like when you start doing that.
Yeah, whatever you say.
Yeah, or like when you start talking about like say the Nazare event, like this this year's event, because it was the first year is going to be a tow, formally be a tow event. And the waves ended up being really good, but when we were looking at it, we're going kind of like, oh, it's it's almost like a borderline swell because the organizers, Bill Sharp and Gary Linden and WSL, they wanted really really big surf for it, and like kind of almost like minimum 60-foot bases. And I think we probably hit it on the sets there, but I was like going into it, it's like, oh, it's kind of a medium size Nazare swell, medium to large size, but not crazy. And it ended up probably, I don't know, like 40 to 60-foot bases and super clean conditions. But it's interesting the verbiage you use for describing different spots and trying to I guess manage expectations is probably the big thing around it.
Totally. It's such a scale.
Well, cool, man. I think that's probably about it. We're going to jump to Chris here in just a few. Anything else before we let you go?
I'm just looking forward to hearing what Borg has to say.
I know. It's going to be a good time. All right, man. Well, good to talk with you, Schaler, and we'll chat with you again next week.
Cheers.
All right, I'm joined by senior forecaster Chris Borg now. Chris has been with Surfline since the very beginning, which some of you might be surprised to know is actually we've been around for 35 years. It's our 35th anniversary this year. I believe in June is when we will officially celebrate that anniversary. Chris has been here since the beginning. He's seen it all. As a guy that I very much looked up to when I was first getting into surf forecasting, 20 plus years ago, almost 25 years ago. I was listening to his recordings way back then on a phone line. That's how you could get the surf report and surf forecast. I was reading all of his wave faxes that came out. And he had a special section called Surfology within each of those wave faxes, and he'll I'm sure get to that in just a second. But Chris, welcome to the pod. I'm excited to have you here, and we could just get right down to it. Love to hear about the history of Surfline from your perspective.
Okay, Kevin. Well, glad to hear such kind remarks from you and that you were a fan way back when. And yeah, it has been a long time, 35 years now. Start at the very beginning, before the internet, was the phone, telephone. And they weren't like the phones we have now. They were connected by lines, and all phones were connected to all phones throughout the world. And you didn't just hold them in your hand. You had to have them hooked up to your wall. And there was just one phone company, and that was Bell, and it controlled all the phones in the United States and probably all the world, I don't know, but definitely in this country, controlled them all, owned them all, and you just rented them from the phone company. And in the mid-1980s, they started a new service. It was called the 976 service, and what that was is they would allow you to buy a phone number, and the prefix of that number, all those numbers, was 976. Those were the first three numbers of the telephone number. And then you were allowed to pick the final four numbers of the telephone number. And each of those numbers corresponds to 3 letters in the alphabet. So you could make a word, a 4-letter word, using those 4 numbers that you picked, like, say, call, C-A-L-L. Then your number would be 976 C-A-L-L, call. It'd make it easy. If you made it into a word, it made it easier for people to remember, and then they would call you up, hopefully. And so what would happen then, the person would call you, 976 C-A-L-L, on their phone, and they would get the information, whatever that was that you were providing. It was usually at a rate of 95 cents per minute, and then they would listen for a minute and then hang up, or 2 minutes, and you get more money. And at the end of the month, that person that made that call would get their phone bill, and on that phone bill would be the 976 numbers that they had called and the charges for those. They would pay those to the phone company. The phone company would take their share of that money and then give the rest to you, the person who owned that phone number. So I don't know what they had in mind originally, what business that would work for, but it turned to be a boom for the pornography business. It was the invention of phone sex. That was the very first phone sex ever. Hadn't existed until then, and then it did. it turned out that for some reason or other, people like porn, and even if you can't see it or touch it, hearing it was good as well. And so hundreds of companies sprung up using the 976 service and provided some sort of porn. Now, there's lots of words, 4-letter words that are associated with sex. It's not easy, or it's not hard to think of a couple. And so companies just blew up using those words, or just maybe other words that they made up that kind of sounded close to those words. So say you really like big feet. Well, then you would call up 976 FEET or 976 FOOT. Now, once you made that call, you'd get the introduction. It would say, hello, welcome to 976 Feet, the home of the hottest feet in town. And then if it was a live person, which sometimes it was, sometimes you'd get directly to a live person, then you could start talking about feet. Or if it was recorded message, then you'd probably get a menu that would say something like, if you like big feet, press 1. If you like petite feet, press 2. If you like 6-toed feet, press 6. And then you press that number, and then you get a recording of feet when they'd be talking about the feet just like you wanted to hear. And you could listen for a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or however much money you wanted to spend. And then you'd hang up and you were happy. And then at the end of the month, that you'd get that bill, you'd send the money to the phone company. They take their share. The business that provided the information would get their share. So everybody was happy. The customers were happy. Phone company was happy. Business were happy. It turned into $1 billion industry, just swept the nation. There were, like I say, hundreds and then thousands of those 976 services, primarily devoted to porn. And so everybody saw that and they said, hey, wow, look at all this money that's being made by this 976 service with a porn. Would it work with anything but porn? And I don't mean but porn. That was 976 BUTT. I mean anything other than porn. Was there some application other than porn which the 976 surf number would work for? And well, they thought, it has to be something that people don't get ordinarily through normal means like a newspaper or television or radio or whatnot like that. It has to provide information that's kind of changing all the time because you need repeat customers. You have to have them dial back. You can't just have them dial once and that's it. You want people to keep dialing back. You want repeat customers. So 3 people in Orange County, businessmen and surfers, they thought, hey, how about SURF? That works just fine. And we could put on reports about what the surf is like right now. And we could do even surf forecasts from this new guy, Sean Collins, who has just invented this new study of surfology, who can now predict waves. And he's just come out with this thing and they knew about him. And so the 4 of them got together and they founded 976 SURF, and they called it Surfline. So it was 976 Surf or Surfline, and the company was born, and that was 35 years ago, and it was a tremendous hit. It started off in Southern California, where there's a lot of surfers, and before 976 Surf, they didn't know what was going on unless they could take a look at and see, at least unless they drove to the beach and saw it with their own eyes, or had a friend maybe who was next to the beach, or lived right next to the beach. Otherwise, they did not know what was going on, and so they could drive to the beach and find nothing. And they wouldn't know what was going to happen the next day either. So it was a really lack of information. And 976 Surf filled that void. You'd call up the number and you could choose either San Diego or Orange County or LA or Ventura initially. And then all the spots of those we would do reports on every morning for the Dawn Patrol. We'd have reports on those spots and you could just list them one by one. You'd listen, oh, that's good. Oh, not so good. And we give the size, we give the shape, we give a description of the wave. And so people would do that in the morning, and we did the same thing again in the afternoon and talking about how things had changed, usually the wind, maybe the tide, maybe the swell a little bit different. And then in the evening at 6:00 p.m. every evening, we gave a forecast, what's going to happen the next day, what's going to happen the day after that, maybe up to a week in advance, telling you about what the waves are going to be. And so it was a tremendous hit with the surfers. They really loved the reports because they'd never had them before. They didn't have to waste time going to the beach and finding nothing or driving all around and finding nothing. And then better than that, they knew what was going to happen the next day from the forecast. Forecasts were pretty good back then, and they've gotten a whole lot better. And then they could find out, well, what are my plans for next week? And they could even see that too. So it was a tremendous success, and it made lots and lots of money, and everybody was happy. And that lasted for just a few years. And then Sean Collins decided to go his own way, a little friction between the owners, and he started his own company, and that was Wave Track. That was Wave Track, a 976 number, 976 TRAK, and that was Wave Track. And so for several years, there was a big war between Surfline and WaveTrack, and lots of money spent, lots of lives lost. And eventually that was settled. And we came together. We formed one big company. We called it Surfline WaveTrack. And there were some few other little companies too. So we crushed all of them. And then it was just us alone. And that was the glory years. We went on for a couple of years like that. And then the internet came. And at first, no one knew what the internet was, and it didn't have much content. But then the porn industry found out that was even better than 976 service, because you could actually see, and people like that even better. So the porn industry swamped the internet. And when we saw them go to the internet, 976 Surf went to the internet too, because we always followed the porn. We knew that was the gold standard, and we went with them. And that was back in the 90s. And then for a while, we did both the 976 and the internet. And then we went more internet because that was making more money, and the 976 service was making less. So eventually it became all internet when we dropped the 976 Surf all together. And then we became Surfline like we are today on the internet. And then when the new phone came out, we were starting to go to those phones as well. Your touch-tone phone, your cell phones, what all like that. And so we just expanded the business as the technology went along with it.
Pretty cool. So, I always thought it was pretty neat that in so many ways, Surfline has come full circle. Like, it started with the phones, and now, the majority of our audiences is getting information from us on their phones again, typically through the Surfline app.
Yep. It just came around again. Different kind of phone, but it's a phone.
Yeah, the other thing that really struck me, and you'd obviously been there for 15 years by the time that I came on board at Surfline. I'm just shy of 20 years. It'll be my 20th anniversary here at basically the end of June.
Right, a newbie.
And, yeah, totally. Yeah. So thinking back on that, the 976 Surf days. Number one, I was one of those people that totally blew up my parents' phone bill when I was a teenager, and they were wondering what the heck I was calling because they'd just see that 976 number, and it's like, no, I swear it's a surf forecast and a surf report. But I was doing a couple of quick calculations as you were talking. So we had going back then, you could call and it would be a per minute charge, or I think you could get maybe a monthly fee too. But if you did the per minute charge, it was like 95 cents a minute, basically $1 a minute.
Right.
I was thinking, okay, if you called Surfline 3 times a week and your average call was probably about 3 minutes, it usually took about a minute to get through the surf reports and about 2 minutes to get through the surf forecast. So, so $3 per call. Say you're just calling 3 times a week, $9 a week. That's almost $470 a year.
Absolutely.
Compare that to what we charge now. It's nothing.
A heck of a deal now.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't hide that. You couldn't hide that from your folks. Just like in your situation, there was a lot of kids calling up. And you can't miss that on the phone bill. Boom, right there, where it is. What's this? And of course, most people associated the 976 with porn because that's 95% of what it was, or maybe even more. And so, a lot of parents, the same reaction. What's this? What are you doing? And it's SURF. It's SURF. It's not BUTT or any of those other ones. No, this is a good thing I'm doing. And so, okay, we'll let you do that. But not as much. Quit, not as much. God dang it. And so, I've heard that story a million times. I can see why too, because man, those minutes add up, just like you said.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think there were probably a couple bills that were pretty easily into the triple digit range on Surfline for sure. One of the other things that you didn't mention in this telling the story just now, but I've heard it before when we've chatted the history of Surfline, and just going back to how, whether it was how we generated reports or how other companies generated reports, there are a couple things that stood out. And there was a company, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can still barely believe this actually happened, but they had someone fly a helicopter up and down the coast, right?
Absolutely. That was when back in the Surfline wars, or the Surf Report wars, 976 wars. And I don't remember what the name of that company was because they did not stick around too long, but they did.
Surprising.
They did make for some reason they didn't last, but they did make the magazines. They did have their ads in the magazines, and one of them was their helicopter zipping along the coast. And they said, man, how can you do better than this? We got a helicopter. We're going up and down the coast. We give you the report right then, man. You can't do better than that. And it looked cool, man. Seen that, whatever their name was on the side of that helicopter, and it had something to do with surf or wave or something. Couldn't have been our surf name though, or wave track or anything like that. But it did relate to waves, and the helicopter looked cool. And in the photo is right down by the beach, and it looked awesome. But of course, there's just a multitude of problems that go along with that: fog and clearance and just a ton of things. And helicopters are expensive, and it didn't work out. So they didn't last long. They were a brief flash in the pan kind of thing, and we didn't even have to worry about them. But yeah, it did happen. They did exist at one time.
Yeah, it turns out that aviation fuel is not that cheap.
No,
apparently.
Not. And helicopters, maintenance, that's, again, pretty expensive business. And the way we did it, just having reporters, didn't cost a lot. We had them right at the beach. We have them go to the closest payphone. They were payphones back then. Don't see those many more now, but they were payphones back then. They were all over the place, and you could find one close to pretty much any beach. And so we had guys looking at, these were surfers, going early in the morning before dawn, well before dawn, just when it was light enough to see the waves, and they could see the waves and in the shape and size and give a description of them. We would call those people from the office. We had coordinators, called them Surfline coordinators. We'd call those people at the beach at their payphone. We got the report for them. And then maybe we called, 10 or 15, 20 guys, depending on what county it was. We compile all those reports together. And then that's what we would record on our dawn patrol report in the morning. And then again, same thing in the afternoon. And also that wave fax, I forgot about that. I skipped over that. But yeah, we used to do the wave fax too. It came via fax machine. And I'd write those twice a week. And like you said, put that Surfology in there. And that was the beginning of Surfology. And put those in there as well. And that went on for several years as well. Lots of surf companies or surf shops put that paper, that wave fax, on their wall so people could read it, and got a lot of subscriptions for those too. And yeah, that was really popular back then. And you can't imagine doing that now with the internet. But yeah, once upon a time, it went out via paper wave fax.
Yeah, so that was, when I was first hired at Surfline, I was hired as a report coordinator and kind of forecaster in training. So I got to learn from you and Sean all through those years, but that I do remember just calling all of those payphones all up and down the coast, and it was pretty brilliant because that ensured that reporter was out of bed. He wasn't just calling from his house and making up a report or anything like that. He was actually there on the beach. But I always kind of got a chuckle about that, just envisioning that person waiting for that call at the payphone. And some of those guys were really great over the years too. Some of them I felt like they were maybe a little lonely because they just loved to chat, and they were all super nice guys. But there was a reporter in Ventura that we had forever that like he would talk your ear off if you didn't get off the phone.
I remember that guy. Yeah, we had a whole host of characters, from the okay, let's do it, and we're gone, and to those ones who just wanted to chat you up, like you say, all day long. And there was plenty of stories too. It looks kind of suspicious when you're early in the morning at a payphone sitting around, and a car drives by and says, "What are you doing here? Waiting by this phone? It doesn't look right. It looks like something's off." So we had a lot of guys had to run in with the cops, but they eventually explained the situation. Didn't have any arrests or anything like that. No tasing incidents, so it worked out well. But yeah, it definitely looked kind of suspicious. And we definitely had to do it too because, the surfers maybe not the most reliable people for getting out of bed in the morning if they're just going to work. If they're going to surf, sure. But if they're just going to work, doing their job, well, maybe not. And they could give you a from the bed report. We didn't want that. So, yeah, we had them at the beach. We made sure by dialing them up at that phone at the beach.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing that at the top of the pod, I mentioned that I was, really a big fan of yours and had read your surfologies and your forecasts and listened to you on the phone, much to my parents' wallet chagrin, I think. But the other thing that that I really remember is as I started getting into forecasting, you as a forecaster, obviously our primary way of disseminating that information. Right when I started, we were online, but still the phone was the primary source of business. And so as a forecaster, you had to put that forecast on. And I would I'd type it out every time and try and read from that, because I'd get really mixed up. And I always marveled at you had a couple of quick little notes, and you'd remember all these forecasts, and you just would never stumble, and you'd always get it recorded and on time. Because that was the other thing, is when you record these forecasts, you had a strict 2-minute time limit, and you get this tone at the end. If you went over, you get cut off, and you just get this beep.
Oh yeah.
And it would drive you nuts, especially as I was a young guy trying to figure this all out. And I'm listening to Chris, and it's just perfect every time. Like, God, how do you do that? And so there was that. And then, for the first 10 years, maybe not quite first 10 years, but first, I guess 6 or 7 years I was at Surfline. My desk was kind of like right in front of Sean's in a way. Like Sean had his office, but there was like a big glass window,
Right.
and he would just look onto my desk. So I always felt like Sean was just staring at me, and I'd get so nervous to do the report or do the forecast. And a lot of times I'd retreat to like some back room where I could find a phone that I could record on, and people wouldn't hear me because I was just a little self-conscious of that. And then I'd hear you just knocking it out of the ballpark every single time.
That just with time. No one starts off doing those right, man. Nobody, not me, and this includes me. Everybody that comes in and they try to do the first time and they just stumble. They get that buzz because they're too long. Start over again, do it again, buzz. It was a blast to see people come in and try to do that. It was just hilarious. And but that came with time. You just, like everything else, you get it down after a while. And that was the same way. But those were the days, all right. I mean, that was the classic Surfline, get that recording on in 2 minutes or get that buzz and do it all over again. Those were the days.
Oh man, it's like a rite of passage for something. I think
it really was.
For a lot of us on the team, and there's a couple of newer guys that didn't get that experience, but for me, obviously, and Schaler, maybe Schaler missed it. He was close.
I don't remember Schaler being there. I don't think you had that.
Yeah, John, I know for sure. Kurt and Mike, those guys for sure. I remember it used to drive John nuts too, because he's such a perfectionist.
Right.
Like that dude would record like 40 times trying to get it right.
Absolutely would. Yeah, I remember him sneaking away to the private room as well when he had the opportunity. But when those times when he couldn't, someone was in that room and he had to do it in front of us, really all of us, because we're all in the same little room there. Then those were great. I love those.
So let's see. The wave fact started in was it like 90, or is it a little bit later than that?
I read around 90.
Somewhere around there, yeah. Because let's see, I think I started. I'm trying to think when I started getting it. I knew like my dad, a couple of my dad's friends had it, and they'd send me a copy somehow every once in a while, and I think I became an actual subscriber either right at the end of college, which would have been like 97, 98 for me, or right after I was out of college, but. I do remember, the first time that I wrote a wave fax, did all the forecast for it, wrote it, was on Christmas Day of my first year at the company. So of course I got stuck working Christmas Day, and it was either a Monday or a Thursday, because those were the days that the wave faxes went out.
Right.
And so it was so that would have been December 2000, I guess, very end of 2000. And I called Sean. He was nice enough to really help me with the forecast. And I got got the wave fax out. And I just remember being so excited that I just wrote a wave fax. I'd been looking at him for a few years at that point, and was just so stoked. I still have that wave fax in my house, in my bookshelf too.
Nice. Yeah, that's something we just don't have. I mean, when record on the phone, okay, that's recording, that goes out into space, gone forever. Now we type it up. Okay, that goes out into space, gone forever. But the wave fax was on paper. That thing existed. It was real, and you could look at it, and people would save them. And I've had people tell me, I got the whole collection. It's I don't know how many volumes that is, but it's a good stack. They've got them all because they exist. They don't just go away like their phone or the internet. When you can retrieve it somehow, but who's going to do that? But the wave fax was actual paper. It came twice a week to your fax machine, and if you wanted to save them, you could. And maybe now you got a whole bunch of them. Maybe someday they'll be collector's items. I'm sure your first one's a real collector's item now. Put that on eBay, man, that'd go for big money.
So and so we had a Pacific and Atlantic version of the WaveFax, and for the Atlantic one, we had Vic Morris. Vic Morris. So yeah, Vic Morris was our Atlantic forecaster for a number of years, and he, for some of you, really old school people or people that are really interested in surf forecasting, he wrote a book called The Weather Surfer,
right?
Which is out of print now, and I think it's pretty tough to find. But it was a really cool book. I remember reading that book. I think before I got hired at Surfline,
Yep.
I tracked a copy down. But Vic was a classic guy, like a good forecaster, like old school forecaster, really knew his stuff. But he was also old school in the sense that he didn't type. And so he would fax his handwritten forecasts to our West Coast office he was at that time, I think he was living in Puerto Rico too.
Yep.
And so, hit the connection from Puerto Rico was just beyond atrocious. It was like, I don't even think it was like 28.8K or whatever the dial-up modems were. I think it was like half of that.
It was low.
Yeah, and so he would fax the handwritten forecast for both the WaveFax and then the forecast on the sites too. And that was also one of my first jobs, is I got to type that out. And that was at a point too when like my typing skills are much better now. I'm still a hunt and pecker. Like I only use like 4 fingers to type, but I'm pretty fast at it now because I've been really, typing a lot of words every day for the last 25 years, 20 years. And at that point, I was a real hunt and pecker. Like I had to look at my keyboard for every word. And I'm trying to like get through this kind of chicken scratch forecast to get it in the WaveFax and get it online. And our office manager, Allison, she'd take pity on me from time to time, and she could type like 100 words a minute.
Absolutely. I remember Allison saving your ass so many times. You were so happy when Kevin, can I type that up? Oh, please, thank you. That just saved you like an hour's worth of work.
And then of course, so our former director of forecasting, Mark Wallis, who is now the forecaster or meteorologist in charge with Weather Service office in North Carolina. And Mark, forgive me, I can't remember which one it is exactly now off the top of my head, but will always be part of the Surfline family. And he's had kind of various stints here over the years, but he started, God, I don't know, within a year of me starting, maybe it was 6 months, maybe it was only 3 months, but within that, kind of that first year or so of me starting at Surfline, Mark came on too. And he started doing some of our Atlantic forecasts. And of course, one of the first things I did is like, Mark, you're in charge of this now. You get to type Vic stuff. Yeah.
Great day for you.
Yeah. It was to not have to copy paste or not copy, just copy.
Just type.
Oh man. So what's you've obviously seen a ton of changes over the years. What's been the biggest kind of game changer in your opinion for forecasting? Was it like the introduction of Lola? Was there something else that really blew your mind once it came about?
There's so many things. And we started off with nothing. I mean, you got to remember back in the day that we had nothing. We had a fax machine. We had 3 surface analysis, pressure surface analysis of the North Pacific. 4, they came out 6 hours, every 6 hours. So we got 4 in a day. We had of the South Pacific, they came out twice a day. So once every 12 hours. And that was pretty much it as far as the information of what's going on in the ocean we had. I mean, that was it. And we had just this primitive forecasting model, which is really just like a calculator. You would take your acetate, your plastic overlay, you'd put it on the map, you'd find the storm you were interested in, you'd make a little fetch, draw the box where the fetch is, where the winds were pointed at you that you were interested in. You'd go to the next map, place that on there again, draw another map, another fetch on there so you could see the fetch advance through time and through space. And then you plug those numbers in, latitude, longitude, width, wind speed, those numbers into our primitive wave model. And out that thing would spit out the data, just would tell you about, okay, here's the first interval coming in, first period coming in at this size. And they would just walk right through the transition of that swell from beginning to end. And it's very primitive, but that was all we had. And there was no cameras. That has to be a huge game changer.
Yeah. Jeez.
Camera. because you never saw the waves. The only time I saw the waves is when I went to the beach. That's the only time I saw the waves. Other than that, we relied on a reporter. Sure, they were good. So you had a pretty good idea of what's going on in these certain spots. But other than that, between the spots or spots that you didn't forecast for, or we didn't have reports for very often, well, you never saw, you never know it. So you would always dying for information if anybody came back from a trip or something like that. Well, what was it like? What was it like? Because you're just tossing out these forecasts and often you never got a response back. Was it a good forecast or was it a bad forecast? What happened? Was it early, late, big, small, fast? What? And so oftentimes you never heard that. And so you're just forecasting in the dark, and that really hurts. And a satellite. So, oh man, these satellites that go over the ocean and measure the waves as they're passing over. And so instead of just having the buoys, which may be a day out at best, maybe a day and a half out at best, and these things are days and days out. And they show you the advancing swell as it tracks across miles and thousands of miles of ocean. Irreplaceable. I mean, I can't imagine doing a forecast without those now. If you went back to the basic primitive 4 maps a day, the North Pacific, 2 of the South Pacific, with just a handful, maybe ship obs if you were lucky, and no cameras and none of that. It was just a whole different realm of forecasting. You were a lot of dart throwing, a lot of dice throwing, a lot of times going to the beach and just being so bummed out because your swell wasn't there or because some awful swell was there. Where'd that come from? Oh my God. I can remember just running down the beach like I do every day. And I like my hand over my eyes. I do not want to see those waves. Just bum me out. Every wave breaking, bum me out. So yeah, those were the horrible lows. But at the same time, when you forecast something, a major change, when it was just flat for days, and you said, okay, on this day, man, it's going to be big. I'm telling you, it's going to be big. It's going to be flat, and then it's going to be big. And then the half actually flat, and then big, just like you said, that's just like not such a thrill. Nothing like that, because you just did the best you could possibly do, and you called it and you hit it on the money. And that was the rush of all time. You really don't get that now. I mean, you sure do get it when you hit a right forecast and things like that, but you got so much advanced warning, so many tools on your side that it's just not the gamble that it used to be. Before, you were throwing the dice lots of times, and you had to be lucky. You just had to be lucky. You had to have some component of luck in there. Now, you really don't have to be lucky. You got all the tools, do that right, and if you're just okay, then you're going to be good.
Yeah. It was like, a step above flying blind there for a number of years.
Cedar pants kind of thing all the time. So great highs and devastating lows.
Yeah. The other thing that I remember you telling me telling our team at one point is just the process of you getting hired. If you want to please tell that story. I thought it was really good too.
Yeah. Well, when Sean left Surfline to form his own company, they had no surf forecaster, none. And that was a big part of the money. That forecast was 40% or more of why people call it, to get that forecast. And so they had to have a forecast. Their business model called for a forecast. No ifs, ands, or buts. It had to be there. And when Sean left, they had no forecaster, period. They were desperate. They had to have somebody forecast surf to make their money, to run their business. So they put out an ad, and I saw it. I don't know how. I don't even remember how I saw that ad anymore, but I just had gotten out of college with my degree, and I sent out a million applications everywhere, and for somehow I found this one up in Surfline, and I was living down in San Diego, and it was up at Huntington Beach. So I said, sure, I'll come up there. I'll get the interview. I'll put on my best foot forward and do my best BSing if I have to, and then it's a nice drive. I'll drive on back, and it'll be a good day. So I went on up. And they interviewed me, and they said, hey, what do you know about surfing? And I said, well, I surf down in San Diego. Yeah, I'm a real kook. I'm not good or anything like that, but I've been doing it. I'm born and raised in San Diego, so I've been in the ocean all my life. I know waves and stuff like that. I got my degree in meteorology, and so, yeah, I know how to do that and all that stuff. And added, a little embellishment, of course, to what I actually knew, I had never forecast a wave in my life. Honestly, I had never forecast a wave in my life. I didn't even know how to do that. I barely knew that winds make waves, and that was about it. But I did it. I sounded better than that in the interview. And they said, okay, we like you. Here is your papers. That is your desk. You have to have the forecast on by 5 o'clock this evening. And by that time, it was maybe 9. And, oh, okay, here's how you record, just like that recording you were talking about. Here's how you do that. And so I had to deal with that as well. And you write up a forecast and have that on and do it in maybe 4 hours or less, maybe. And that was my day. I went there thinking I'd go home with maybe a yes or no or maybe. Instead, I got the job and I had to do the job on that day. And that was very first day one. And it just went on from there for a couple of years where it was pretty much me all the time, every day. 6-day weeks were absolutely typical. 7-day weeks, not uncommon, because they didn't have another forecaster. I was the forecast team, and we had a forecast every day. And so maybe on a Saturday when I came in and a Sunday looked like it was going to stay pretty even, it wasn't going to change much, I would write up a forecast for one of our surf coordinators, and they would read it on. And that was my day off, maybe, if I had that. But if it looked like something was going to change and I couldn't be confident the next day, that Sunday was going to be like I thought it might be, well, then I came in and did that day too. And so that went on for a couple of years before we finally got somebody else to help take the weekends. And so I had weekends then. But yeah, that was back then.
Yeah, I mean, so you were on for a couple of years, few years without a day off.
Years, no days off, no sick or anything like that. You just got to do the forecast. And so, yeah, those were the days. And again, it was exhilarating in the times of exhilaration and not so much exhilaration.
Crazy. Well, Chris, I think we'll probably end the pod here. At some point, I know we're going to have you back on to dive into a couple of these things, maybe a little bit deeper. But I appreciate you giving us a rundown of Surfline, a history of Surfline from your perspective. I appreciate all the work you've done at the company and allowing me and so many of us on the forecast team to actually get positions here and learn from you. And it's as always fun working with you and appreciate you taking the time on your day off today, actually, to jump on the podcast with me.
Yeah, it feels like old days. Well, no, this is great. Just always talking about Surfline is fun with me, going back through the history and all of that. It has been a lot of changes, day and night, really. And it's great to see the new crew come on and learn like you guys have and advance like you guys have with all the new technology and whatnot like that, and see Surfline so strong. And I know we're, everybody's sitting in the dark right now, but I'm sure we're going to come out of it and be stronger than ever. And it's great to be a part of all that. And Surfline's been very good to me, and I've enjoyed my stay here. It's gone really quick.
Quick 35 years.
Yes, it has been, newbie.
All right, Chris. Well, enjoy the rest of your week off, man, and we'll be chatting with you again soon.
Will do. Sounds good, Kevin. Take care.
Okay. See you, Chris. Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Forerunners, the Surfline podcast, normally dedicated to helping you score waves, but things have changed up a little bit today. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Just hit that red button below or the Surfline logo in the bottom right and let us know what you think in the comments below. If you have a question, we may try to answer back in a future podcast or a future article. So please do let us know if you've got any interesting thoughts or interesting questions. If you're not yet a premium member, click on that icon in the bottom left for a free 15-day trial of Surfline Premium, as we would love to earn your business. Be safe, be good to each other, and we'll talk again next week.